I was born in Muskogee, Oklahoma, October the 6th, 1929. And right in the middle of it in the Dust Bowl. No, people were scattered, mostly farm people, small farms that were drying up. The best way I can describe it is distant, on account of Oklahoma hadn't long been a state. It had been a territory, and it was considered Indian territory. That's the word Oklahoma itself means land of the red man.
Yes, sir.
And so that's where a lot of the Indians who came from Florida, Georgia, Alabama, some parts of Mississippi, parts of the Deep South, over what they call the Trail of Tears, primarily the Choctaws, the Chickasaws, the Creeks, and prominently the Cherokees, who were forced out of their places where they were prior to coming to Oklahoma. Forced out of Florida, Seminoles were forced out of Florida, and many of them came across what they call the Trail of Tears. They called it the Trail of Tears because so many people were lost making that journey. They were forced out of their, what they considered to be their tribal homelands, into some barren territory called Oklahoma. Oklahoma at that time was just considered barren and worthless, and nobody was interested in it. But later on, they found out that there was oil there, so here they came again. They took the land again. It was the land that they had given them. I mean, it was worthless land, they thought, because you couldn't grow very much crops there and all like that. It was just kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And far west at that time, what was considered far west. So a lot of populations of white people were in these southeastern part of what you call Georgia, Alabama, Florida, principally. And so they said, well, let's just get these red people out of here because they're in the way.
They pushed them.
And a good place to push them would be out there in Oklahoma, where there isn't anybody anyway, and nobody's interested in that land anyhow, which is what, under the system of white supremacy, that's what they've always done. They go everywhere in the world and just dislocate people. That's part of their process of doing things, for the most part. Now and people and made up mostly of just small farms. Because after all, it was the West, kind of wide open places and whatnot, and people kind of just scattered out. So it wasn't a lot of contact between people, simply because there wasn't a lot of people. We had black schools there and whatnot, and the schools were, I would say, they did very well with what they had. And but that wasn't where I started thinking about the race issue per se, because we weren't in contact with white people. It was when I was in the military in Japan, and that was much later, and that was in the 1950s. I was in the Korean conflict because I was in two branches of the military. One branch I was drafted into, that was the Army, during the Korean conflict, the initial parts of it, 1951. And after I got out of the Army, I stayed out for about 4 years, and then I went back into the Air Force. I volunteered on account of economic reasons. So while in the Air Force, that's when I started writing my material. I was in Japan, and it was during the Little Rock crisis at Central High School. And that was when I started writing the first pages of my book, because people were talking about it. The military people, some of them were having conversations about it. I didn't know very much about it except what we were getting just by reports. It was a very volatile thing.